So welcome everyone. This is our March 2021 meetup. Tonight we are really happy to have Cameron Dobbs. He is Director of Data Engineering at Westcreek Financial. And I have known Cameron for a number of years, worked with him previously at CapTech actually. And really happy to have him, excited to have him come talk to us about some of the stuff that he's doing and they're doing right now in his company with data. So I will turn it over to you, Cameron.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks you everyone for joining. I know we've all been staring at computer screens and been on Zoom calls all day, so very happy to have you guys here. So like David said, my name is Cameron Dobbs. I'm Director of Data Engineering over at Westcreek Financial, which is a Richmond-based firm. Westcreek Financial focuses on point-of-sale financing, specifically in the lease-to-own and loan space now, a full spectrum product across subprime, prime, super prime customers. We're mainly a B2B company. We offer our product through brick and mortar stores, but soon to get into the e-commerce world and really blow that out of the water. So we're growing fast. We're really excited about where we are and what our trajectory is. And it's been a wild ride. I've been at the company for about a year now. And my team is growing as well. We're up to 4 data engineers inside of a tech org of around 30 people, and we're hoping to add more. So if you know any friends or even some enemies, please let them know that Westcreek is hiring for talented data engineers. So today I don't have too much content for you. I don't mean to go 45 minutes an hour. I'm hoping to keep this around a 30-40 minute mark. But I wanted to tell you guys about a tool. DBT stands for Data Build Tool that we've been using at my company and why I've been using it in some of its key capabilities. So to start off, what is DBT? It's a CLI tool designed for data analysts and data engineers to transform data in their warehouse. Here's a nice little diagram overview you find on their website, kind of capturing the high-level components. But it really is a just point-to-point transformation tool. And it's really simple and straightforward, as I'll be demoing to you guys in a little bit here. Some of the high-level components that we'll talk about in a little bit. Transformation piece, obviously, this is done mainly through just SQL queries, which I'll get into. Testing piece, which I'm very passionate and excited about, talking about testing in the data world. I don't think we do enough testing. I think we're leagues behind the software engineering world. So to see tools integrating that testing framework inside of them is very exciting for me. Deployment, version control, alerting, logging, monitoring, when things fail, when tests fail, and then documentation. To me, this tool excels at documentation in terms of data cataloging and data governance, which I'm going to get into in depth in a little bit here. So that's kind of all the big pieces of it. Taking your raw data, you're loading it, transforming it into some business-oriented warehouse, mart, as you guys know in the data world. So let me just kind of cover our tech stack at Westcreek Financial at a high level. We're connecting to your typical source systems, relational databases. You got your files pulling from S3, and we got some application APIs that we're integrated with and sucking data out of there. We're using Stitch as our main ingestion tool, which is a web-based point-and-click ingestion tool. It's been pretty slick, very useful, and really easy to use for our purposes. Databricks, of course, kind of the Swiss Army knife for us. We've been using it for a lot of our integration work, specifically for hitting a lot of our APIs in some of our source systems. And lastly, Snowpipe is a great feature functionality of Snowflake itself, which allows you to connect to an S3 bucket and ingest files from the S3 bucket as they land in real time, and it just plops it right into Snowflake. So very useful tool for that. And then right in the middle here is DBT, which I'll be talking about today. Transform into our storage layer, Snowflake, and then we're consuming with Tableau BI and direct connection, and some of our models are pulling our machine learning models are pulling our analytic data. So why is DBT at Westcreek Financial? Why are we using it? 3 main points here. For our company, it's a great fit. Low barrier to entry. It's easy to use. And the purpose of this talk is I really wanted to come at this from the data analyst perspective. I know this is the data engineering group. I'm aware of that. But in my group, where we're at right now, our main stakeholders that we produce our product for, our main consumers, is our analyst community. And having a low barrier to entry in terms of we can pick up this tool and make it easy for both parties. That's something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm really excited about to share with you guys about DBT as I continue on here. Fast development cycles, as you guys know, dealing with data analysts, they want their data and they want it now. So the sooner the better. And we have a small team of data engineers and data analysts overall. Still a fast growing company, still a small tech group, small analyst team, small data engineering team. So it fits really well, I think, within a smaller organization like that. Some things DBT is not. It's not enterprise orchestration. It's very much settled within the transformation space of point to point within a single storage layer. So you're not going to be making calls out to other things. You're not going to be, orchestrating massive pipelines across different technologies with DBT. It's not for ingestion, like I was saying, we're using Stitch and a few other things to pull data into our sources, but that's not what DBT is for. And it's not for integrating across other tools like I was talking about. All right, so let me talk about the data analyst perspective. So what do they care about and why is DBT a good fit? They want easy development. They want to be able to understand the data in the data environment across the entire enterprise, right? Not just within their little silo, but they really want to know, hey, if I'm in this group, what's that group doing? What do they have? What does that mean? Who built it? They have all sorts of questions, those pesky data analysts. They want to feel confident in the data quality, that what they're pulling from a production environment is good to use. There's, always problems with people questioning the data. Hey, this looks wrong. Hey, this isn't right. Go dig to the bottom of that. And the testing framework that we have, and I'm going to get into, is something that really helps in this area of giving our analysts confidence that what they're pulling out of our warehouse is going to be accurate. And lastly, the data is organized intuitively. DBT helps a lot with that, but it does come down to how you want to organize your databases and schemas within your warehouse at your organization. So it's up to you, but DBT makes it easy. All right, so from a features on a data engineering perspective, some of the things that we love about it is independent dev environments. So each one of the developers on my team, they basically have a full-blown copy of production. When they're running and developing locally, they run the entire project. We're all pointing at the same source data, which is our production landing data, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We're all pointing at the same source data, but we're producing our final models, our end data models, in our own isolated databases within Snowflake. And that is just a joy from someone that's, had to work in shared environments before in the past, thinking, SSIS and SQL Server. It's always been a challenge. And even setting up independent environments within those older tools or more established tools has always been a challenge as well. So that's a big win for us. Then really the easy to use and maintain frameworks, such as a lot of this I hit on already: testing, the metadata, data cataloging, version control. Your entire DBT repo is version controlled. Hook it into Git, hook it into GitLab, GitHub, or whatever other version control tool you want. The monitoring around the jobs is great, intuitive. And the orchestration between your models and the dependency between the data sets you're building, which I'm going to get into, is handled beautifully within DBT. It's also flexible and powerful in certain ways. Oh, look at this. Misspelling. Flexible. Man. All right. Just to warn you guys, I have a 1-month infant at home, so I've been a little tired these days. So please ignore the spelling mistakes here. Flexible and powerful. So like I said, the fast iteration times, you can go in there, make changes pretty quickly, push it up to your master branch, get it deployed out. Pretty low barrier for development to production. We love that. And there is a lot of power in it. The underlying DBT project is written in Python, and it uses its own code called Jenga, which I'll show you guys a little bit of in the demo. And there's a lot of capability for customization in terms of you can make you can produce functional bits of programming that are called macros that can do a lot within the system of how you want your data to build out, how you want it to organize, how you want it to interact with each other, how you want it to standardize. And I'll give you guys a couple examples at the end of the demo of that. So we love it for all of those reasons from a data engineering perspective. So put those two things together, bridging the gap. So what do we both care about? the understandable data environment for me is huge. Being able to look at easy to read documentation that says this table means this, and these fields mean this, and here's the data type, and everyone's looking at the same doc and has the same understanding of that data is great. And I'm gonna give you guys a preview of the documentation, the DBT Docs in a second. Developer-friendly data models. That means you don't have to be a hardcore 20-year veteran in the data engineering space to become extremely effective using this tool, even from an analyst perspective. You know when and why something breaks. So that comes back, tied back to the testing. If we are building out tests that capture business intent, then when one of those tests fails, we know what model it failed on and why. It failed some sort of business rule. And that business rule should tie to a business owner or to an analyst or to a domain. And you can have that conversation, that partnership with them of why did this thing break? It's not meeting the expectations built into this test. So I'll stop there before I launch in the demo. Any questions? Go ahead and throw them out there, or I'm just gonna keep rolling along. Awesome. I'm gonna assume someone is trying to ask a question, but they're on mute, so I'm gonna keep going. All right. So demonstration part. First thing I'm gonna show you guys is the DBT Docs. This is what I show the analysts at our org, or what I would really pitch to any analyst to say, hey, here's why this tool is so cool, and here's why you're gonna love it from an analyst perspective. Here is example documentation. I built this demo project recently for this presentation. And here's an example of what the DBT documentation looks like for data cataloging and understanding what's in your data environment. We have our sources. We have some of our seed data, which I'll talk about. Here's our actual data models. And here's some of our tests that I've built. So let me just talk about the data models real quick. A lot of good metadata here. This is very customizable. You can add as many tags as you want. You can add as many different qualifiers. Contains PII is huge, right? You need to know if something has sensitive information for data masking purposes, data governance purposes, access control, whatever. Business owner, I think, is fantastic. You can add something for an implementer here. And the idea is you're fostering that partnership between the business and the data team, and you're building up that sense of data steward. This person owns the intent of what this data should represent. And I think that's huge in the data space that has a lot of room for improvement, let's put it that way. But in the more technical side, has all the columns listed here, has what type they are, and you can have detailed descriptions. You can also inject markdown language into this type of document that you can really go full out if you want, putting diagrams here, putting references, and do whatever you want to make this a real rich understanding of your core or production data models within your company. So another really cool thing on here, which analysts always get excited about, is what we call a lineage graph. So if you open up this guy, this is a graphical representation. It's really a DAG diagram that shows all of the models and tests and sources within your data environment and how they relate, or how they are dependent on each other. And analysts get super excited about this functionality because it's always very difficult for them to understand, if I want to change this, what are the downstream impacts? Or I have a problem with this final data model. What is upstream of it that fed into this data model? Instead of tracking down query by query by query by query and a mess of SQL queries, this picture really helps describe what's going on there. And it's got some really cool functionality where you can filter down to a specific data set. You can focus on it. You can view documentation for each one of these individual nodes. You can exclude tests or include tests within the picture. And I'm going to show you guys what a full-blown enterprise build out of this actually looks like. So a couple other things in here, you go to SQL and you actually see the compiled SQL, the actual DBT model, or the compiled just SQL statement that results in these final model outputs. That's really nice to have it in one place they can go to and see what the definition is and see what the tests are. And this is closely aligned to the actual database within Snowflake. What they see in here is exactly, if they flip over to Snowflake database and they're looking at this, this is exactly what they'll see in here. So it's a really good tie between, here's my data, here's my code, here's my test. Oh, that's what I see inside of Snowflake when I'm exploring or trying to understand where to get my answers from. So an enterprise build out of the Lineage, this is our repo within Westcreek right now, can get pretty big. I'll show you guys what that looks like. So this is all of our current models. We still have a lot more to go. I think we have about 120 models overall. But you can focus on any one of them, and the purple lines are all the downstream. If I zoom in a little bit more, refocus on node, there you go. So here's all the downstream of sales team info, which is awesome. So that's the pitch to the analyst from a data cataloging and visualization perspective, and they really love that. From the data engineering perspective, this is the online DBT Cloud Tool. This is how you actually schedule and run your prod jobs. And it's really straightforward, really simple to set up, the scheduling, what actual execution or command line entries that you're actually executing through the prod jobs. And then the output is really neat. You can just click on any one of these runs. It shows you all the models that were run, all the successes, and then you can click on your tests. We actually have about 331 tests. I know it's just a number, it doesn't really mean much, but we're trying to shoot for an average of 3 to 5 tests. And I'll give you an idea of what those tests look like in a second. But this is a great way to show, just from an engineering perspective, easy to schedule jobs, easy to view job results. If anything fails or goes wrong, they'll shoot off an email and we can just click into this and immediately find out what went wrong. And then we can actually go to our docs and say, oh, let's pull this code for this test that failed. So works out great. Really appreciate this aspect of DBT. So let's get into the code a little bit now. If the analysts are salivating at the mouth with all that functionality, I'll show them how easy it is to use on the code side. So DBT projects, like I said, just Python project. It's really easy to download and install, configure, and set up, and you're off and running. You could probably take you about a day if it was your first time using it. John Kostner, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. I was interested in those tests, and are those part of DBT, or is that custom code that you wrote to, look at the not nulls and stuff like that?
Short answer is both, and I'm about to get into testing in just a second.
Cool. Right.
So let me know if I don't answer your questions. So getting into the DBT project here, it's organized very similar to the database itself. You got your core schema that relates to your core schema in Snowflake. So that's what I was talking about. It's intuitive in terms of the organization. It's not a weird, complex project structure that doesn't relate to what they're seeing on the Snowflake side or whatever database you're hooking this up to. So that's really nice, just from a navigation perspective. But a data model in DBT is really just a select statement. And this is a data model I created for this demo project. And it's really just a select from this source table. So there's a few things about this data model I'll cover, and then I'll get into testing a little bit. There's config tag up top. Anything with the double curly brackets, it's a Jenga reference. Jenga is like think of like a markdown language that they built for, actually, I don't know if they wrote it for DBT specifically, but it's a markdown language / scripting language that they use for a lot of the functionality within DBT. So starting with the config, this just tells you what is in this model and how you want to materialize it, and then what other metadata you want to capture about it, which is really nice. So this is the name of the model. It's materialized as a view. And anytime you can come in here, if you're seeing performance problems when people are selecting from it or using it for other purposes, you can change this to a table. And DBT will handle how that definition is used and how it's built out inside the database. So that's another example of just the flexibility there, which we really like. The tags are great for the search functionality within the UI, the documents I was just showing you guys. You can search for model names. You can search for tags in terms of, I want to see all the models just related to the sales group. You can search for tests. You can search for column names. So it's really cool to be able to search through all of your enterprise data and try and find what you're looking for. But lastly, like a data model in DBT is really just a select statement. And this is really coming back to the low barrier to entry and the easy adoption by data analysts. Is you don't have to know how to write an insert. You don't have to know how to orchestrate a daily snapshot or daily delete and insert portion of a code. All the things you'd have to build within a stored procedure to handle your daily executions and scheduling, none of that in DBT. It's just a select statement. So that makes it nice and straightforward, but it does have some downsides. For example, there's no temp tables within DBT, so you really have to refactor those to common table expressions or CTEs, or break them out into other models that then get merged together within the DBT run. Right here, you'll notice that in the from statement, this should usually be a table, but the magic of DBT, and one of the key features, I think, is these references to tables. This is a reference to a source table that I'm using for this model. This other model, I'm referencing a source, but I'm also referencing that first model I showed you. Okay, big deal. What do these references do? These references is how DBT builds its dependency diagram and execution, and what the source of this lineage graph is. The reason it can build this DAG is because of the dependencies and references you guys build in to the models here. Does that make sense? I'll stop there because this is a really cool concept, important concept of DBT, and this is a big lift to development space.
Yeah, I have a question. So if we're not using the reference, instead of we're using the hard-coded table names or something, then the DBT will not be able to generate that graph, right? Dependency graph.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, because it won't understand the relationship or dependencies between the models. When you use these references, that's how it understands the dependency between the models. And I'll show you guys what that looks like when I actually do a DBT run.
Thank you.
So the DBT docs I showed you guys with the definitions of all of the table names, all the metadata, all the fields, that's all housed within the project too. This is something I get really excited about because data governance and data cataloging, data definitions, all that goodness that we all want in our data platform is always so hard to maintain through whatever tools that you choose, right? Keeping it up to date, making sure people are reviewing it, blah, blah, blah. DBT, it's right alongside your models. So this is an example of a schema YAML file. And in the schema YAML file is where all of this metadata is captured. Metadata about the name of your model, a description of it. You can make this as detailed as you want. Like I said, you can even inject markdown language in here if you want. And you can add any metadata tags that you need. And you can actually define each and every single column and then also apply some standard DBT tests. I'm going to start talking about testing in a second here, but to tie it together with the DBT docs, again, this schema YAML file that you have for your models, that you can have for your sources, you can have for your seed files, you can have for your tests. Well, sorry, not for your test, but for those things I just mentioned, that is what is rendered on your DBT documents. So that's what I get excited about because analysts can come in here, they can do development within this repo very easily. We can put the onus on them to fill out those schema YAML files. And that ultimately makes its way to this single source of data cataloging and documentation that everyone has access to and can see across the enterprise.
Hey, Cameron.
Yep.
I got a quick question. So I actually, sorry, I didn't really look at this tool at all before today. So kind of coming to it for the first time, but is this, would you say this is like an ELT type of thing?
It's really just a transform.
Transform, okay. So I'm assuming your data is in a database and you just want to transform it into another format. Is that okay?
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. So what you're really starting with, and I was going to go back to another diagram, but that's okay. What you're really starting with is a set of sources. In DBT, you're saying, here's all the data that are my source data that I'm interacting with. And all of your source data needs to be within your storage layer. So in our Snowflake environment, all of our source data is within this one database landing and separated by schemas depending on where the source comes from. So we use Stitch and our other ingestion tools to get it here in its raw format. But once it's here, we define them as sources within DBT, and then we pick them up and build them out with our transformations into our warehouse. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I see you're using VS Code. Is that kind of your primary editor for this?
I was a big Atom fan, but my colleagues have told me that I was being too basic. So they told me to switch over to VS Code. VS Code has a lot of cool features that make life a lot easier. So, but I was using Atom, ATOM for a long time.
You can use whatever text editor you want, I guess.
You can use whatever text editor you want. It's just a
Okay.
big old text repo. Yep.
And so the code you were saying is just really, you're just writing select SQL
Yep.
to transform your data. Okay. And then
Exactly.
this does all the orchestration and all those other features that you were talking about. Okay.
Exactly. So I'm trying to highlight the features that make it so these simple and straightforward features are really valuable when you apply them at enterprise scale.
And just curious, like what engine is it using for the actual, like running the queries?
It's running in a Python environment.
Okay.
So all of these scripts go through the DBT Python project when you run it. I'm going to show you guys some executions here. And then really just compile to SQL statements that are then executed against your database.
So in this case, it would use Snowflake to actually do the computation.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
You're basically just submitting all these SQL queries down to Snowflake to run.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good point. Let me show you guys how this product actually works now. So like I said, CLI, command line interface, right? So this is how you're actually interacting with your local project in your local environment. So if I do a DBT seed, this will load my static seed data that I have defined within my repo itself. Runs it here, shows you how many records it inserted for each of the seed data. And I can flip over to Snowflake. And here is my seed data schema. And here is going to be the data that I just loaded into it. So that's for seed data, static data. I can get into that in a second here. But the classic one you're going to be using all the time is DBT run. So when you actually hit DBT run, it's going to be running all of your data models that you've defined here. Shows you which model it's running, shows you success. I have both of these materialized as a view. So the runtime basically instantaneous, because if you think about what it's doing on the back end, it's just refreshing a view definition, right? Now in Snowflake, here are my two dimensions and they're both views. So that's all it takes. And this is my own like isolated demo, is its own isolated database development environment. So if I did a full DBT run in my Westcreek Financial environment, it really built out an entire copy of the product, which for us is not a big deal because we don't have trillions of rows of data. So it's very manageable. So DBT seed, DBT run. Let me start talking about tests because testing is pretty cool. So if I run a DBT test, I'll show you guys kind of what the output is. I do have this set up to have one failure here. So it'll run all your tests. It'll show you which one failed and how many results you got. All right, so let's talk about tests. So in our YAML file that describes all of our models, which again, just think about as a data model, just a data set, right? Just a table of review that you're outputting to Snowflake with all your transformations in. So here's our YAML file that's describing and providing all the metadata for what this is. DBT has some built-in boilerplate tests, let's put it that way. So it's super simple. Within this YAML, you say, here's my tests, and they have 4, I believe, tests. One is on uniqueness. For this column in my model, I want DBT to test that this is unique. I want it to test that there's no nulls in it. And then another cool one is it's a foreign key relationship test, but for this field in my model, compare it to another model. Now I only have 2 here, right? So it's real simple. For this field in this model, compare it to this model and find anywhere where the foreign key constraint is broken, basically. So it's really nice. And these are all boilerplate. You don't have to write any code. It's literally just typing in these configs within this YAML, and DBT automatically generates those tests for you. And those tests show up right here when I ran it. Test relationships, dim dealer to dim application. That is the boilerplate test that I just defined right here. So on the other side of it is custom tests. Custom tests are SQL statements that you write that really are just pass fail. If they return any records, they will fail. So you're really writing I guess it would be a negative test. I forget what the terms are, but if it returns any records, it fails. So you want to write a test that says, whenever this block of SQL runs, I'm expecting 0 results. And that means it's a pass. So here's a couple examples of some tests I wrote. And you can get as complex or as simple as long as you're following that the final output criteria is I have records or I don't have records, if that makes sense. So here's an example of a test. Hey, for this dim application table, I should never have an approved amount, this is a dollar amount, less than 0, because that's breaking a business rule. Like the business intent for how this should operate does not follow this. And this is what I was talking about earlier with bringing in your analysts, bringing in your business analysts, data analysts, just experts in your domain, and saying, hey, what should hold true about the data you care about? And if you can codify that in a test, and that test runs every time your DBT project runs in your production pipeline, then you know that they're confident that you're satisfying their business intent for what this data should represent. And to me, that's really powerful. So this is actually one of our tests that failed. Fail, one dim app amount test. So it failed because what I can actually do is I will go to my docs for my amount test. I can find the SQL that it compiled down to, grab that, throw it into Snowflake, run it, and boom, here's my offending record. This result should not exist. All right, let's say it's some big bugaboo to go into our actual source system and update this data. But let's say a data analyst takes a look at this, they're like, oh yeah, that was for some reason back in 2013, the system went haywire. We've already written that off. We've accepted it. Don't worry about that. Basically, you don't have to test for this record anymore. We're cool with it, exclude it. So this is where seeds come into play. Seed data is a static list of data that you can, that lives with your repo. And it's got a lot of use cases, shouldn't be used for everything, but it's very helpful. And one of the use cases that's really helpful for is building test exclusion criteria just like this. So I created a CSV within my data folder here, and I included that offending application ID. Now within my test, it's very simple and in line with my project to simply say, for this test, I want to exclude that application that we don't care about anymore. So that my test doesn't fail every time it runs, and it's still checking for things that we care about. So I saved that, entered that exclusion. When I run this specific test for dim application app amount test, moment of truth, will I work? I'm being recorded here. Hey, look at that. So utilize my seed test static data, incorporated it back into my test query in order to enrich it or make it better or help out with our understanding of it. Everything's in line. You can always reference it. Say, oh yeah, why did we do that again? You can put comments in here or put comments within your seed data itself and say, hey, why are we excluding this? Blah, 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 blah. So that's testing in a nutshell. Got all of our boilerplate tests, unique, not null relationships. And I think it has it's almost like a domain integrity. You can look at a pick list, like, are all the values within this field represented within this specific list? So you can put in something like that as well. But then the power for the custom test is something that really impresses me. You can bake in business intent into your testing framework that shows your analysts that you've validated or that you've heard their understanding of the data. And that's how your system is operating. So I think I've covered everything basically that I wanted to cover. Basically, like what a model is, why it's so nice to have something as simple as a select statement as a model. Some of the boilerplate tests that are built in, custom tests that you can write, and the way you can catalog and add rich metadata to your data sets all within the same tool, not relying on external tools or external parties to upkeep that for you. So I'll stop there. I can show you guys a couple more things for the demo if you want, but I think it's a good stopping place. Are any questions about what I've covered so far?
I've got questions if nobody else does, Cameron.
Please.
I've got a question. Go ahead.
Yes, you go ahead. Bill.
Can you show an example of doing a test where you need one field that depends on the value of another field?
Well, within the same model, it's just a simple select statement. Like I always want this pay date to be greater than this pay date, but you can write as complex a query within a test as you want. It's just, again, it's constrained by the output of, are there records returned or are there not records returned? That's it.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Great. Yeah, I think that's what I was missing, is that these tests are really just based on whether records get returned or not. So
Yep,
that
just
makes
pass
sense.
fail.
That's
Yep.
super powerful. Thank you.
Yeah. So there is something we are working on currently, which is mock data tests in our own environment. And this is another great use case of seed data. So engineer on my team, Mike Lucky, shout out, he's actually here right now. We are setting up a seed data, remember, just a static CSV file. When I say seed, it's just a static CSV, right? We're setting up a data output to represent, here is a set of information that we know should always be true. And we encapsulate that into a file. And when our model runs, it takes the output, it takes this file and says, does the output of our model match what's in this expected information in this file? So we're mocking up data. And every time the model runs, we can say, hey, does this mock data match the real data within our data model? Because we're mocking up data, but this is real data use case that we're pulling out. We say it should always be this way. So this becomes really powerful because you're basically encapsulating, here is the right answer all the time. If something changes in the code, if there's some model change, some business intent change, we know that it's going to break or it's not going to break. So it's a really powerful way of mocking up data, instrumenting data within a data environment, which is traditionally very difficult to do. So that's another example of using the testing framework here. Yeah, David, you got any more questions?
I was kind of blown away by your CSV there, the color coded CSV.
Oh, you like that?
You
Yeah,
want-
that's a package within VS Code. They say
Yeah.
it's helpful, but I don't know if it is. But
I think it would be very helpful, actually. Yeah, I want to ask about the VS Code, like the tooling around this. So is there a, looks like I see a thing at the bottom says DBT is not installed. Is there like a DBT plugin for VS Code that you're using, or? Like,
yeah, there's a couple packages here. Let's see. Installed. So we found a few things online. A big benefit of DBT is there's a great community around it. There's a good Slack channel. There is a lot of posts and forums about this, and there's a lot of extensions being built for just usability, which makes it pretty nice. I think I have this installed here. Yeah, so I can actually click through, and just like you would, I don't know if you guys know, like through like a Java project, you can control click on classes, and it'll jump you and open that definition for a class. So it's a plugin that I downloaded that helps you with that. So you can click through your actual references. They're treated like objects basically, which is fantastic. So yeah, we have a few different plugins installed here, David. That's why I switched over to VS Code. It's got a little bit more advanced functionality here.
That's really neat. I was going to ask, like, is there any kind of, like, for the YAML configuration, is there any kind of like drop down, like, it would give you IntelliSense, like for the different built-in tests, for instance, or anything like that? Or do you have to go look those up or just remember them?
Not that I've seen. Let's see. No, not that I've seen. Yeah, for the boilerplate tests, they're all pretty simple in terms of what they're doing. So,
I mean, do you ever have issues where the YAML, like, it's just a pain to do the YAML, or is that fairly straightforward?
Sometimes, yeah. In some of the project configurations, DBT project YAML, and there's a profile YAML. Some of the stuff in here gets a little persnickety to make it configure exactly how you want. But that's just a time and frustration thing. But it's been able to do what we want it to do.
Yeah, I mean, Whitespace Matters, right? And
exactly.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you're programming in Python, you're used to that. So
yes, yeah, you mind your spaces and your tabs. Cool. Well, a couple other shout outs I wanted to call out from the functionality perspective. There are macros that you can build, I talked about earlier, and that's really powerful. Example of a macro. I think I have a good example here I can show you guys. Here's something that we're using a macro for is you can define the macro using this Jenga scripting language, like I said. And it's really, think of it like a Python function. So you're saying, here's a macro name, here's what we're expecting as inputs, and then the definition of the function or the macro itself. And what this is doing is creating an MD5 hash from the input columns that you're providing it. And that way you can use this macro anywhere you need to recreate this hash for this specific model, or you could abstract it even more as a piece of functionality for anywhere you need to create a specific hash, MD5 hash, that's useful for consistency purposes. This is a great example of taking a piece of functionality, abstracting it away from a specific SQL implementation, but being able to call this function in whatever model that you want to access that functionality. The classic one in DBT you'll see online is they use it for date formatting. So like whatever date you're working with, you use a macro to describe that date. It'll put it in the proper format, the proper time zone, the proper blah, blah, blah. And again, it's that single piece of code that's easy to change, and it changes across all the places that it's being implemented. So let's see, there's a lot of orchestration you can do based on different tags or criteria of your models themselves. You can tell them to operate differently. And again, if this, do this, and this, you can pass in schema information, exposes the column types, the data types within the macros, and you can actually make decisions on how to operate based on that as well. So there's a lot of power within this functionality that is yet to be explored. So that's really cool. Another call out is there is support for incremental loads and snapshots. Incremental loads is DBT handles the daily incremental load based on some sort of date or ID that you set up. So you're basically saying, hey, only load this many records from this date or something like that. And that's your typical, delete and insert kind of store procedure. And it handles it pretty gracefully within the model itself. So that's really nice. And then another functionality I just wanted to call out. It does do some complex things. It's not all just select statements. Another piece of functionality is snapshotting. I have one right here. So snapshotting is same idea. You put in a special scripting language to identify this model as a snapshot. You tell it what criteria you want to snapshot on. Hey, based on this ID, check this column. And if that column's changed, write a new record to my table. So it's almost like slowly changing dimension functionality as well. So it has pretty simple functionality to handle that too. Yes, Mike, do you have a question?
Yeah, so the demo is kind of a small collection of models, but what happens when this gets to like full enterprise level? Like you have 200 models or something. Like would you create separate instances, almost like domains? Like finance might have one perspective with its business rules and sales as another, or do you just put all of that into the same project?
It's up to you as an organization. How we've chosen to do it at Westcreek is we have our core folder with all of our shared data models, if you want to think of it that way. And then we have domain specific folders where they're more use case driven per domain. So this is where typically they would use the core data models to build their own final outputs to support BI reporting, to support ad hoc analytics or long-lived analytics, I should say, or to support, like an big aggregate table that they use on a daily basis. That's more domain specific is how we've structured it. But if you wanted to create different projects for different domains, there's probably pros and cons of that approach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then do the tests have a similar structure? Like you just break out the tests package into the same, or?
I was hoping no one would ask me about that. We haven't figured out a good way to organize tests. Well, I should say what we have is fine. I'm sure there is some very smart people out there that have figured out a good testing structure. But basically how tests work, if you're calling a test through the command line, whatever model you're referencing the test, it understands that dependency. So like if you're saying test this specific model, which you can do, which is the DBT test a specific model, it will go out there and find all the tests that this model is referenced in and execute all those tests. So there's kind of a coupling there between the tests and the models to begin with. And then it really comes down to how you organize those tests into folders just to keep track of them as a development team. But I don't have the perfect enterprise strategy for it. Let's put it that way.
There you go. Thanks.
No problem. All right, guys, I said this would be quick and I feel like I went over, but I appreciate all of your questions. I can wrap it up now. So final thoughts, again, just want to come back to there's so many amazing data platforms out there right now, but I still feel like an area the data is behind overall is some key platform principles like testing, metadata, monitoring, alerting, data ops. And that's why I love DBT, because it makes all those things easy and understandable. And you apply these simple principles and you take them out to scale is very powerful. And finally, DBT can empower non-engineers with confidence. They feel good about what the results the data is producing, clarity. They can look in these docs and understand, if you have good definitions, understand everything going on. And then they feel more closely partnered with the data engineering group, because you guys are communicating together how to incorporate that business logic into your testing framework. So that's all I got. Thank you guys for your patience.
Thank you, Cameron. This is really good. I have one last question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So did you choose this, or like, was this, I mean, how did you make the decision to use this tool? Just kind of curious, like there's a lot of tools out there. So just gonna,
yeah, going back. Yeah, good question. Going back to like why we chose it, really the low barrier to entry, fast development cycles, and a small team. We thought this tool fit really well with just kind of the dynamics of our group.
And are you happy with the decision? I mean, it sounds like you are, but just...
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a great fit for what we're trying to do.
Are you guys, in terms of like support, do you have like support from the company directly, or how does that work?
Yeah, they're really responsive. Their Slack channels going bananas at all times. So you can go on there and ask a question, you know, other people to answer you or link you to threads, or you just hit up their support directly, and they've been really helpful so far. So
okay, I saw on their website there was a lot of big names using them, seems like. So cool. Well, thank you. I guess unless anybody else has any last questions, we can wrap things up. All right. Well, thanks, Cameron, again. This is actually really, I mean, this is probably one of my favorite ones we've had so far. So I was really excited to hear.
Thank you, David.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I don't know why, but like I really like the you know, the code first approach here versus you know, kind of comparing that to sort of the drag and drop interface you get with a lot of ETL tools.
Yeah.
This is definitely more of a code based approach, which I think has a lot of advantages. So, and it seems like they're leveraging that. So yeah, this is really good. Thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.